to today's presentation, low-level ESL using packets and volunteers. My name is Nicki Olalde, and I am the ELL program lead at the Lindale Neighborhood Association. We are located in South Minneapolis. We are a community-based organization and English programming. It's one of our programs. It's not our only program. I'm also a beginning ESL instructor. So we're just going to start with a question that I'm sure you've heard many times, but I'm going to talk about it in this context of low level. If you could chat out now how you are teaching your low level ESL students at a distance. And again, I want to focus on how you're handling it with low level and not just English learners in general. Some options, are they working independently online? Do they come in person for a small class or one-on-one instruction? Do they partake in synchronous online learning, let's say in a Google Classroom? Do you mail paper packets or other? And if you are, an extra question, if you are using packets with your learners, how would you describe the experience?
So Nicki, we're seeing lots of interesting responses. I don't know if you're able to keep up. There's so many. So some Zooming with packets, some paper packets, some online synchronous. A lot of people using packets. Hand delivered, Jane says, every 2 weeks. Some of them are mailed. Some folks are coming in for one-on-one instruction. Some of them are doing sort of a hybrid online and in-person setting. Tammy says, teaching pre-literate and high beginning, some students working independently. Everyone's doing paper packets, and we're doing one-on-one appointments as needed as well. Mostly packets, and another person says half day in person every other week. One person's not using paper packets yet. Looks like quite a mix, and a lot of small Zoom classes.
I am not able to see that chat. And I normally can, so thank you.
Yeah, sure, I'll keep track of it. Some people are using video twice a week, she says. Zoom classes. Yeah, looks like a pretty good mix of things happening, actually. And then the second question Nicki asked is, if you're using packets, how would you describe it? Like, what does it look like? If people want to chime in on that.
I would be interested in knowing that as well, because we're constantly refining what we do.
Person says they're using synchronous Zoom, but they send the packets to be done perhaps in advance. Someone else says it's going really well with their packets. Adam K down in Faribault says packets it is what it is. Another person says uses a new one each week and color codes the papers, purple for conversation, yellow for vocab. That's a great idea. Organized by daily assignments, one a week. Some are using Google Meet to then go through that material. Some are using ReadWorks articles related to the literacy unit. Grateful to get feedback on the packets. The students are grateful to hear back, it sounds like. We do packets with students and then meet with them about a week later. Someone developed a binder with all the math worksheets and English worksheets and ASL dictionary. That sounds like a lot of work, my goodness. Rachel says that's life or life goes on, reading books and the Sam books. That gives you a sense, I think, of all the many things happening. Go ahead.
Well, wonderful. I'm very happy to hear that. And thank you for everyone for sharing. Oh, Patsy, it's not moving on for me.
So it just popped up at the bottom of your screen. You have to use the arrows. Hover again at the bottom of your screen. There you go.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Today, so what we're going to be covering today, what I'll be covering today is a little bit about Lindale's learning context, the background, where we're coming from, some equity considerations for remote instruction, needs assessment, these considerations from the Minnesota Department of Ed. Why telephone-based packet instruction? Some people kind of think. That just seems like it's a little crazy, but there are a lot of good reasons to do it. Some examples of lesson materials, how to prepare for one-on-one instruction if you have yet to do it, aren't thinking of doing it, and or it's just a planning grid, something that we have designed at Lindale that you might be interested in. Some feedback from our volunteers, and time for questions. Okay, so this is a little bit about Lindale. I'll try not to talk too long about it because it could go for a while. One of our challenges, we have no central site. We're not located in a school or in a place that resembles a school. We have an office, and we have 3 partner sites in the community: the YMCA, Horn Towers, High Rise, and the Wells Fargo Bank. Unfortunately, we lost several buildings in South Minneapolis in the Lindale neighborhood due to fires from the uprising after the murder of George Floyd. We lost our post office, which affected getting materials out, and we lost our morning classroom with all our materials. So we weren't able to bring students back there even for small classes. The learners we have, I'd say most of them, well, this is a challenge, but most of them are beginning level. And what we found in doing outreach to them is that many of them lack internet access and or digital devices. Most do have cell phones or smartphones, but this was not something that everybody had. Because of this, our learners not able to do synchronous online learning. And because we don't have internet at 2 of our 3 sites, we have been unable to provide any digital literacy instruction in the past. And then Erin and I were a staff of 2. We had to lay someone off. And so we don't have any prior experience in teaching remotely. And so we were kind of starting from 0. But that's not to say that we don't have strengths. We have a lot of strengths. Our program is community focused and place-based, meaning everything we do, we try to connect them to the community, and we are located where they are instead of them having to come to us. And we have an extremely strong volunteer pool, and that's key because we wanted to draw on that when implementing the remote instruction with the packets and the volunteers. Our volunteers are dedicated, long-term, and really, quite frankly, almost immediately started reaching out to us to see how they could help. And there's a lot of collaboration and flexibility. So these are all strengths. So what we started to do when considering the program was, let me move this. We looked at all these factors through an equity lens, and you might have seen this list before, so I'll just touch on it briefly. How do we serve the students who do not have dependable access to devices or internet? Because I think when everyone says distance learning or remote learning, which we're starting to use now, they think they're on a computer, they're doing everything online. How do we serve students who do not have strong digital literacy skills? And our students in the literacy or beginning English levels. So we have learners, I'm sure you have learners that have scores that they don't score on the CASAs up to about 200, but in general, 180 to 200 on the CASAs. And how do we serve students who, most of them who are 55 plus are at high risk of illness? So there are actually several benefits to packet-based instruction. First, talking on the phone twice a week with learners helps maintain connections with students who are unable to do internet-based remote learning. We also keep, in having our volunteers work with us and teach with us every week, it keeps our volunteer base intact. So fingers crossed, when we do go back, they will come with us. And it's a unique opportunity to focus on listening and speaking. And this, I think, is really important. as you may know, it could be challenging to do speaking and listening instruction in the beginning level class. There could be a lot of distractions, a lot of first language interference, and this is an opportunity to really sit down and focus the instruction for an hour at a time in the target language. And being on the telephone or WhatsApp forces the learner to focus on these skills. So we really tried to focus on that, at least in the beginning level, rather than trying to do lots of writing or other. And checking in with them allows us to provide assistance. If they're isolated, we have had students come down with COVID, say they needed access to food, and having this regular communication has allowed us to help students out. And also in the process, they have referred their friends into the program and we have allowed them in. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This just to show you some examples of beginning pages you might see in a packet. You might recognize them from on the left. I think it's Ventures Basic and Standout Basic. So doing packet learning doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel. You take what you have and then you put a lesson to it. And then with these, you could see we have on the left colors and prices and clothing. There are a lot of different questions we could practice and also that they can ask questions. And so that's important when doing packet and phone learning, is not just asking. We want them to ask. And so I tried to choose materials that promoted a lot of interaction. And this is just another one. There are, and I will share this presentation. I don't know if it's going to go through Atlas, but I will somehow share it if you would like to see it. There are some live links that Patsy's going to chat out with you that are connected to a sample of a unit plan in the beginner and the lesson plan that corresponds with it. So feel free to take those, use those however you need. And let me know. You could contact me if you need anything else or looking for other things, because we have about 6 months of units for beginning and intermediate. And while this is not an intermediate presentation, I just wanted to show you what this may look like. There's a sample here of the objective and the purpose of the lesson. And we write the lessons, and I'll talk more about that later. We don't just merely send out the packets. We write the lessons so that we can have like a quality control on the type of instruction that's being offered. So that, I'm not sure how other sites are doing it. That's how we're doing it. And if you notice on this material here, where Erin has written paragraph and numbered the lines, it makes it, she's embedded CCRS standards in there, citing evidence right into the packet. So that's really cool. So does anyone have any questions so far? I apologize if I'm speaking too quickly.
And I'll just encourage people to use the chat box or raise your hand if you would like to speak up and have a question for Nicki. And those materials, Andrea chatted out the beginning level lesson plan and level materials and the intermediate ones in the chat box. And Nicki has made those available to everyone. And you developed those, correct, Nicki?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so for how much, can you say a little bit about the beginning level in particular? How much instruction were those aimed at? A couple hours, couple weeks?
This?
Yeah.
This is a page within the beginning materials. Packets are generally 10 to 16 pages. We write, Erin Carey and I write plans for 2 lessons a week, and they're posted the week before on the Google Drive. And that link is shared with our volunteers. She writes her lessons a little different. She puts them in a block. I separate them by day. But either way, it's about how to establish context, how to get students speaking, all the things that you would practice in an in-person class on the phone. And we write it that way because it also helps it's a training, it's a built-in training for our volunteers. They're reading these teacher developed lesson plans every day. And in the process, we're seeing that the volunteers are becoming better teachers, so to speak. If something's missing, they're saying that they've incorporated aspects that they've seen in previous lessons in their future teaching. So I think that's what's really important, is that we can control that quality there. And then when we are back in person, it doesn't have to be so hurried, because they already have received like a weekly training by the way of the lesson materials. These are, this particular picture on the left, I think I drew, it's an hour lesson, or I might even take in a little bit more, but I was able to do a lot with it. So, and that's another reason we write the plans, because if you see them, you might just want to read through it and turn the page. And so we're doing training, and we're also trying to really go deep into the material instead of like just cover a lot.
We did have one question, Nicki, in the chat from Abby around how is this different than what you were doing before? How are these materials different?
They're not. The materials are not different. I would say how we go about at least in the beginning, how we go about, I've approached teaching it. A focus on just a lot of question and answer. And so even though, you know, I've included a lot of speaking practice in there, that I would say 90% of what they do, the students and the volunteers do on the phone, and Aaron and I have students as well, 90% is speaking and listening. So it's the same thing, but we're using it a different way, which is interesting, because you can take any material and draw more of a writing out of it, or more of a reading. This one, I thought speaking and listening, because students will say, I want speaking and listen. I want speaking. So it's the same, just executed a different way.
Right. And one other question before you move on, Jane asked, are you spending an hour in the phone with each week with each student?
It's 2 days, 1 hour at a time. A couple of volunteers work with 2 students at a time. Sometimes, you know, if you have a husband and wife together, but it's 2 hours a week. We do have a student who has specially requested 3 hours a week. But so it's a lot less than they were getting before. They were meeting 12 hours a week. On the other hand, I don't know how it would come out, but it's a lot more intense as well.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other question. What do you do if students don't have minutes? You call in unexpectedly, or you can't reach them? Has that come up for you, where your students don't have that much on their cell phones?
We haven't come up with it. We haven't come across that.
Okay, well, let's ask that back to the chat too. Maybe someone else in the group. There's a nice big group of us here. If that has happened to you, how have you managed it? We can crowdsource a little.
I believe we've asked the question. I don't think that we've come across anyone where that was an issue. That's a good question. That's a very good question.
Great, that's all I'm seeing. Nicki, go ahead.
Okay, so to get started, preparation is the key. It's a lot of work to get it off the ground. It sounds like several of you are already doing this. So I don't know how much time I need to spend on this document. These are live links. If you want the PowerPoint, you can click on them. This is a document we use to plan for remote instruction, and then also for your information and orientation webinar that we made to jumpstart this program. So I'll just click on this. There's a lot of things to consider. I think like anyone who's doing anything right now, it's just been an unbelievable amount of planning. I'm not sure how we were able to make it successful, but we have been able to. We had this all in our head. I put this on a paper for you so you don't have to make notes. And I broke it down in 4 weeks, the steps you'll want to take. Steps that we took, you know, Aaron and I sat down, we discussed options for our site, you know, what are our challenges, our strengths, and who are our learners. Then we conducted these student calls about 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks after we shut down classes, check how they were doing, gauge the desire for remote instruction, which was challenging with the beginning learners because this is really, what do you mean? School should be in class. And now you're telling me I'm going to talk on the phone. And set a time to call them back. So we had to set 2-3 calls to make sure that yes, they were interested on a second time, that confirmed this is your teacher, confirmed the phone number, they got the packet. 3 weeks prior, and of course you could do these at the same time, talk to the students here and talk to volunteers. I just thought, it's a lot of work. You might want to divide it up. Gauge volunteer interest, let them know what your plan is, and asking their availability. And so then I created a schedule and we matched them based on, I can only do mornings or night or only this day. So we kind of gave them an overview in an email, and then we created the resources on the Google Drive, which had the lesson plan sorted into level, beginning or intermediate, the month, scans of the papers students received, and link to a post-class feedback form. That form is important because it allows us to see, to look through really quickly once a week. Okay, these are the challenges that students are having. These are the successes, but also we're able to see, okay, they met an hour and a half, and we could take that date and that time amount and record it in SID. So that might even be the priority there. And then the rest is just information for us to adjust our lessons going forward. We may not have considered something that volunteers have discovered. 2 weeks before we unveiled this, we held a webinar, background, same thing, orientation to the program, goals, and how we would support the volunteers. And that link is available in the chat, and it's here as well. You could take a look at it when you have a moment, but it has just a lot of what you might even see in a Literacy Minnesota training. Best practices, considerations, monitoring teacher talk. We made assignments, student volunteer assignments, and then a week prior, we mailed out papers early in the week, and by the end of the week, verified that students received them. The first month did not go very smoothly at all. It was early June. The mail was, if you remember, not getting delivered. When it did, I think students didn't recognize that they were throwing out the manila envelopes, but we got it. So, any questions on this? On what I have here? This planning document?
I'm not seeing any questions. Feel free to use the chat.
Maybe you just let me know because I can't see the chat.
Yeah, no problem. And there's some little bit of back and forth around what app to use if people don't have minutes on their cell phones, WhatsApp, Messenger. So some people are trading best practices there and tips and tools for the trade. Jane asks, how many students are you working with total?
We have 25. Because there's a cap on the amount of volunteers we have. We are looking to start an advanced synchronous online class, but we're at 25, but we're getting more volunteers interested, so we should be able to push past 30 easily in the next week or so.
And I wonder how that compares to how many you were serving pre-pandemic.
I mean, we were probably, we're a smaller site, serving 60 to 75, so it's definitely not as many. When you're doing one-to-one, the return on it is drastically smaller. I mean, you wouldn't pay someone probably to teach a class of 1, but with the assurances that we received through the Minnesota Department of Education to just provide instruction the best way we know, and we're in the process of working through the list and getting people connected to English through other means, like an asynchronous learning online if they're able to. So,
Right.
but
Well, and I'm struck by
another
all the,
presentation.
yeah, well, I'm struck by all the things they're learning, you know, the digital literacy and the managing the different apps and all the other things that they're doing, even though they might not be doing synchronous instruction like larger programs are able to pull off right now.
Most of our learners are using WhatsApp. They do have that. Some of them are using just the telephone, which definitely makes assessment more challenging, having to embed that in the lesson ways to assess that if someone does write something that it's understood. But WhatsApp with varying degrees of success using WhatsApp.
Right. And
So
that has come up in the chat already. And in fact, I know there's a good blog post about that with low-level learners I'm going to find and pop in there as well. So
yeah.
good. Thanks for that. I'm not seeing any other questions about your planning doc. So.
And I had to provide a training on WhatsApp to the volunteers because many hadn't used it, but they like it now. Students like it. And it allows to, you know, just use real life items. We have a volunteer who uses family photographs, items in his house, shows his garden as a way to like generate conversation. And it allows them to be connected. Okay. So I put the word out to our volunteers and asked them for some feedback because it could sound all well and good just from me, but how do they feel about it? So these are direct quotes from our volunteers. What do you see as the advantage to the student to learning in this format? And these are some of the comments that I received. 1 second. Pardon me. The student receives personalized attention while working on an approved curriculum. They may learn new technology skills. Several of our learners are learning how to use different functions of WhatsApp, like the rear-facing camera, taking pictures, mixed success, and sending the pictures. But it's an opportunity to do that. Third comment, it may be advantageous to have undivided attention of a volunteer over a period of weeks and months. And that continuity would be difficult to achieve in a classroom setting. You know, you might have a different volunteer every day of the week, but here they have opportunity to really know what they need to work on. And I've noticed some of the comments we've received in just working with learners is improved confidence, which is huge. Confidence in speaking, confidence in asking questions. And I think you get that comfort level, then there's nobody watching. That's the other thing. If you're quiet in classroom and you want others to do the speaking, you have to do the speaking, but no one else is watching. So that is one advantage. Pleasant surprises with this experience. One volunteer said WhatsApp works very well in this context. And second, pleasant surprise. Yeah, there's a typo. Has been engaging one-on-one. Has been that by engaging in one-on-one learning, we are working on foundational skills that our students must acquire. And as a volunteer, the opportunity to work with a student remotely has been a great experience. The student assigned to me has been ready at the designated time for every single class. By and large, we're finding students reporting ahead of time, 24 hours. I'm not going to be able to make it. Can I reschedule? And I think these are changes that we didn't see before, but important because this is what you would need to do for work. Being personally accountable. Some challenges. Anyone who's taught on the phone knows that there's interruptions. But this volunteer says it allows opportunity to take a break because it is intense and it is tiring. And he can jot down some notes. And interruptions are fine. It's probably, they might even be welcome for the learner as well. The most challenging thing is to learn and explain carefully, proactively to our students. You know, you can't use your hands. Well, you could if you're on the video, but not everyone's on a video. Body language. If you're trying to just explain which page you're on and you're on the telephone without pointing and showing this page. So, and the final one, this is a middle-aged student who does not seem to have had any school experience before coming to the U.S. Despite admirable efforts on her part, her progress with English has been slow and uneven. So I'm currently working on ways, I think, to overcome that. One of the things I'm adding to the lessons this month, I don't know why I didn't think about it earlier, is phonics instruction, like from the Martin Frank book, Analogy Phonics. Because what we're seeing is that by the end of the lesson, students can read these words, but after they've been drilled, which is not decoding. So what could we do in this context? So I have provided resources, phonics resources, and how to teach it. And what is your advice to a volunteer who wishes to work in this context? If you use WhatsApp, have Realia readily available and a small whiteboard handy. We do have some volunteers with intermediate students who will use Zoom. They will share their screen and type things and project them. Learn the technology before you get on the phone so that you can focus, and learn WhatsApp fully and be prepared to be patient. So is anybody doing this right now with volunteers, or at your site, are the teachers, the lead teachers, providing this kind of instruction?
All right, we had one person in the chat, Lisa, who said she is working with 7 students and doing one-on-one instruction, and she is doing that all by herself. So as the teacher, she's providing that.
I'd be interested to know if you have any volunteers that could assist you there, or.
And there's a question for you, Nicki, asking, what do you do for volunteers who don't want to use their personal number with students through WhatsApp?
I only got that question very recently, a new volunteer. And I think you can get a Google number, if I'm not mistaken. But so far, nobody has had a problem with it. And maybe because they already knew a lot of these learners, and so they felt comfortable with them. But I'm going to investigate that for this new volunteer I'm bringing on, because I wanted him to be able to feel comfortable calling our students.
Yes, you can use a Google Voice number on your phone with WhatsApp, and I will pop some instructions for it in the chat box so people can download that.
Great, thank you.
And Lisa did chime in to say no volunteer, you asked. So that's a lot of work. Jane says she has 25 students, 11 are new arrivals to the US and focuses mostly packets, but this has been inspiring to increase phone instruction for her.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't think we knew how it would go. And we were just like everyone, it was a shot in the dark. And our volunteers and our learners have been reporting a great deal of satisfaction with the program. Like I said, the speaking and listening students look forward to it. Anyone that has left because maybe getting a new job, we've been able to fill that. And our volunteers, if one of their students leaves, is asked to be placed with somebody else. So it's really exciting. We'll be going into, I think we're in our 5th or 6th month now. And one of our volunteers is actually going away for the winter to Arizona, and he has requested to continue on with his students. So, which is good because you can do it anywhere.
Right, we've had a couple people chime in. I wonder if either Betsy or Sarah or Hannah would want to unmute and say a little bit more about what you've mentioned in the chat room. You should be able to unmute on your own.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying I really appreciate some of her ideas. I really liked. I'd use a volunteer every day on my Zoom class, and I've struggled with my volunteers that haven't been successfully able to screen share in their breakout room. And I use packets, and your idea of having a picture where where the volunteer can ask lots of questions related to the picture is fabulous. I'm just going to incorporate that in my next set of packets. I'm just appreciative.
Thanks.
That's great.
There are a number of questions you could do. The picture that, if you recall, about the two people at the store, how much is it? What color is the shirt? How much is, I'd have to look back at that. But what really fills that one page, that filled like 2 full days. And what filled the days was making sure that we established a routine of switching the roles. And I put in red font, highlighted yellow in the lesson plan, switch. And so it was a little bit of a learning curve getting the student to understand that they had to ask our volunteers now. But it's easy to fall into the trap of just being so focused on the teacher and the students just respond. And my thought was, this is a unique opportunity to get them to generate questions, because in successful communication, they need to ask questions too. They're not always just going to be on the defense answering questions. And so now they've come to expect it. And I recycle the previous questions throughout the lesson. And I'll be honest, there have been lessons that I haven't even planned for, and the volunteers went ahead and they said, oh, I learned to put in the review. Oh, I did the switch. They were ready to do the switch. And so that was really cool to see. So that hopefully, that'll translate to when we go back to in person. And, if you've ever handed papers off to a volunteer, you could do this, and this, and then, and how could they remember it all? And so it's like a training for everybody.
Great, thank you. We had a couple other people in the chat. I wonder if Elizabeth Guedes Garcia, if you would want to unmute and say more about what's going on at your site.
Hi, yes.
Hey, go ahead.
I am first of all, I'm really impressed to imagine, Nicki, what you and Erin do as far as creating lessons that are clear enough for multiple volunteers to use and to be running a program that way. That it takes a while for me to wrap my head around that, because it's such a different model, but more power to you. Yeah, so because we really have, our use of volunteers has been so limited to just the volunteers who had a really strong relationship with teachers and just kind of followed the teachers right into the remote learning in the spring. And just now we are trying to do more to bring on new volunteers and to help bridge the gap with volunteers who do not have the tech skills themselves. Because that was never a requirement before. So I am finding this really, really useful to try to look at expanding how we're able to serve students, especially students who don't have a lot of access to technology. And I like the idea of trying to get to where you are with preparing lessons to be shared with volunteers. That to me would be a goal to work toward. And we've got quite a bit of work ahead of us to get there.
Well, thank you. And I shared one unit, and I have more. You guys, if I would be happy to share them all to look at. Part of it is making it very clear, numbering the steps. Do this 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's easy to follow. They look really dense. There's a lot of text on there, but after they go through the lesson, then it just becomes second nature, and that they're, like I said, there are certainly been days that I haven't posted something, truth be told. But I checked in with them and asked them if that, if they like all that detail, and they said that they did. So I guess good for them. Sometimes I don't like prepping it all, but it has good results. And Erin and I did consider, we talked about when we were doing a needs assessment, because we heard some sites were mailing papers back. And we just thought that might not work for our learners. Not that it's a bad idea. It's just most of our learners being beginner who may have difficulty with decoding, reading instructions, understanding what's being asked. You know, there might be, would it bear fruit? Would it be beneficial to do that? You know, plus we had no post office. The post office that was 2 blocks from where most of our students live was completely burned to the ground. So the closest post office is 3 miles away. So that was another thing that why we put the focus on speaking and listening. So just because of circumstances, now we're practicing skills that I think are kind of difficult to do with beginners anyway. So it's funny how things work out.
Great, thank you. A couple of things, that the materials that have been shared, Andrea shares that some of those will be posted on the Literacy Minnesota website. And then I just want to remind people that in your event flyer, actually towards the top, there's a participant folder link. Not much use to check it now because not much has been posted there yet, but as the conference comes to a conclusion tomorrow, we'll be getting PDFs of all the slides for every presentation, as well as any resources and handouts that were used. Just like you might collect things and handouts and such at a live conference, all of that will be accessible with the added bonus of everything you didn't actually attend. The sessions, you know, there's only one of you and 3 things going on at once, but you'll have access to everything via that link soon.
I think I forgot to include this. Actually, one of the things that we built into this program was being in constant communication with the volunteers. So we set up Zoom office hours, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening on a Tuesday, where volunteers can show up, share about their lesson, pose questions. We could bounce the ideas off each other. And that's been successful. I mean, not everyone comes all the time and some don't come at all. Some prefer to just call, but we are available to take those calls, and because we want them to be successful. Also in this, we've come up with some pretty cool ideas just brainstorming together. So that allows us to have that interaction. It's not just, I think it's important not just to assign, but to maintain communication all around. And that's what's made it more of a satisfying experience. Certainly there's frustrations, but I think ESL volunteers understand that. Okay. So is anyone using volunteers now with low-level ESL, and what does that look like? I know I've heard about maybe sending out materials and the volunteers have to generate a plan. Is anyone able to share what they're doing, in particular with low-level ESL?
And then I'm just wondering, Nicki, while people are typing, if Andrea wanted to chime in about some of the resources that we know are available at Literacy Minnesota, since it'll take a couple minutes for people's responses to come in. Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. We, kind of hit the ground running with training volunteers remotely. So we have between 2 and 3 webinars a week for helping volunteers get experience with remote instruction. And I'll go ahead and I've put the chat where you can find some technology training supports with WhatsApp checklists and Zoom checklists. And I'll also put a link to our new certificate classes, different certificate programs for foundations of remote instruction, as well as social justice instruction for adult basic education certification. So I'll pop those in the chat in a minute. But we have free webinars for teachers and volunteers. We have recordings of some of our more popular webinars. The Remote Tutoring 101, Lesson Planning 101, and Adapting Materials 101 that volunteers can register for and then watch on their own time and complete a video viewing guide. And we have a lot of resources under Educator Resources section on our website with all of the tutor tips over the past few months, 5-6 months that have been posted are all about remote instruction, different resources that volunteers can access and are free. And then, as I mentioned in the chat, starting with LNA's materials, we're going to be kind of having a hub for different places where people who are using volunteers can share resources. and get some other ideas from other programs and have a clearinghouse to go and grab materials for if you are using volunteers, and use some of the great work that's already been happening with programs out there. All right, so I'm going to stop talking because I see there are things coming in the chat, and I'll grab some of those links that I mentioned and pop those in.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure if you can see the chat, Nikki, but let me just share a couple things. Sarah writes that they do breakout sessions and have volunteers like in the breakouts with materials that have been sent previously. Volunteers at another site are helping EL students with reading and conversation. The district isn't allowing volunteers in the building at this time, but she's excited to try the telephone stuff. So that's good to hear. You've inspired. And then Elizabeth again chimes in around some of the work at her site. The low-level ESL teachers are using volunteers more than higher level teachers, and teachers often use volunteers to support the Zoom meeting, like in the breakout room. Sounds similar to someone else who chimed in. Volunteers are also helping with group classes on WhatsApp. And then you're just getting praise for the materials you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, could you say something about this? We have breakout sessions and they help with the materials that I've sent them previously. Would you be able to unmute yourself and say something about that?
Yes, I have 2 volunteers in my adult ESL class, and I teach levels 1, 2, 3. It's a multi-level class twice a week. And I prepare my lessons on Saturday or Sunday. And we use Standout as a basis, but I also tap into other resources. So for instance, now I'm using Lingua House, which is an awesome website. We were able to get the subscription, a paid subscription, which is fairly inexpensive, $49 for a year. And you have access to 1 million worksheets, and they're broken into categories and levels and topics and so forth. So what I do, I prepare a lesson, and then I email my volunteers the PDFs, or sometimes we use short videos. Also, I send them a link on the weekend, either Saturday or Sunday. And then on Monday, we meet on Google Meet. They get it. I only use one link for all my lessons. So we start the lesson at 6. We chat about the weekend. I always have a word of the week. And then after we do those 2 opening activities, sometimes I do, like an activity with pictures for engagement. Then we do breakout, and then they're doing the same thing that I am doing. And I'm very intentional about who I put the volunteers with. So if I want to do the low levels, I send 2 kind of the same level students, 2 with one, and then 2 or 3 with another one. So they're using the same materials that I'm using. We're differentiating on how they access the information or what kinds of skills they want to work on, but it's the same content. Like right now, we're doing a unit on community, learning a lot about prepositions and simple present and so forth, names of people in our community and so forth. But that's what I do. I prepare lessons on the weekend, send the materials out to them, and then we go from there.
So very similar.
Exactly.
Or if not the same.
It works out very nicely because everyone is getting the same content. We're just differentiating on how much they're able to do.
Right. Oh, that's great.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Oh, no, thank you. Let me move down in this chat. I was able to pull it up.
Yeah, and Andrea has shared the training calendar for webinars at Literacy Minnesota. Thank you for that. And also the Foundations of Remote Instruction certificate information. So thanks for that. And there was a session on using volunteers just before this one, actually. So if you weren't able to get to that one, it will be available, the recording, and of course the materials in that participant folder that I mentioned earlier as well.
And Andrea and Literacy Minnesota have, if you haven't looked already, a lot of great relevant trainings that I would encourage you to share. If you are working with volunteers or you're thinking about starting, definitely send them an email every couple of weeks, or communicate with them in some way, letting them know that these resources are available to them. You certainly don't have to reinvent the wheel. Literacy Minnesota is providing great sources to help you out, because it already is a lot of work. It's rewarding, but and Andrea has thought about a lot of this already. the WhatsApp training was very helpful. And I recommend it to people before they even started. So I'm also available to do, I would recommend, you know, if people need to like download about something, try a different idea. I'm meeting a lot. I'm the volunteer coordinator and teacher, but I don't know. I have a feeling that it will bear fruit down the line too. It's not just an interim thing.
Great, thank
Move
you.
on.
I did just put a reminder in the chat that we have the Language and Literacy Institute as well, coming up January 28th and 29th. Of course, that'll be virtual, but much more emphasis on all things ESL, of course, happening at that conference. All right, go ahead, Nikki.
All right. There's actually a slide we shared in our webinar with volunteers, and this is what it certainly feels like. But you can do that if you're looking to get implement something like this in your program. It's doable. And I think, like I said, it engages the students, but also maintains your volunteer base that you've already cultivated. You know, I don't know if this the volunteers that decided not to do this kind of instruction, if they will come back, but I feel like those that have engaged in this remote one-on-one program will be coming back. So I think the more you can keep them engaged, you're on their radar. And so when you do go back to in-person teaching, that you're not all of a sudden trying to regain students and trying to retain volunteers. You know, this is work that we could do now. If we do have a little bit more time, I would suggest that.
Yeah, I can say a little about this.
Sure.
So if everyone is able to come back to the conference tomorrow, just a heads up that in the middle of the morning, we have kind of an extended break where we're allowing people some extra time to connect with each other, depending on what content area you teach. And so of particular interest to those of you here is the low-level ESL coffee break. It'll be facilitated by Amy and Jamie from Cedar Riverside, who both teach very low levels of ESL and just have a lot of great insights to share. And they've both presented for us previously. And this is a conversation. It's not a workshop. It's not a presentation. It's a way, grab your coffee, take your break with other people who are doing similar work and swap some stories. So that's tomorrow morning. We just wanted to be sure that was on your radar.
Thank you, Patsy. Let's see here. All right. Please feel free to contact me if you want to discuss how to implement a similar model. If you have questions that that appeared in the chat that I wasn't able to see until just recently, I am available. I'd love to talk with you, and I'd like to hear what everyone else is doing. We could maybe implement that in our site as well. Is there anything that, if anyone needs to unmute that have a question, that maybe there was a question posted that I didn't see?
I'm not seeing anything. You're getting some thanks in the chat box here. So I think if people are ready to take their break, we will absolutely understand. Please go do that. I'm going to put the link to the flyer. And if you have questions, you want to stick around and chat with Andrea and me and Nikki here, feel free. Here's a link to the session flyer so that you can navigate your way to your next session, which begin at 3 o'clock. There's a manager meetup. There's one on math resources with Jeff Gumas. And then Marn is doing a session on eDRA and eAlphabetics with Teresa. So join us for that. And we'll see you back at 3 o'clock, or stick around if you have some more questions for Nikki.
Thank you so much, everybody, for attending.